you should be a monster, an absolute monster, and then you should learn how to control it. Welcome back to Catch the Zenith, the podcast where I talk about high performance and business. My name is Nicola. I currently work in software sales. And today we've got another episode of Zenith Reflections, which is a format where I reflect upon my week, share some ideas I had, the lessons I learned, and everything in between. The first thing I want to discuss today is why it's worthwhile to become a monster. Now, for the sake of this episode, I define monster as someone who is capable of standing up for himself while being strong enough to figure out where his limits are. So there are two components to that definition. First, being a little more disagreeable, and second, figuring out how far you can go, where your limit is. Now let's start with the first part of this definition and explaining why it's worthwhile to become a quote-unquote monster. What I realized over the past years is not wanting to please everyone is a behavior trait which very much helps me in my life. Sometimes it's very important to stand up for yourself and leave your agreeable nature behind and be a little bit more disagreeable. Because the world can be very cruel and we need to be prepared for war, metaphorically speaking. You don't want to be a goldfish in a shark tank. And there are also very practical reasons to be a bit more disagreeable, especially if you're dealing with people pleasing and stuff like that. And I'm, again, talking to myself here. Generally, agreeable people make less money in the same position because they don't negotiate on their own behalf very well. They are perhaps scared of saying, hey, that's how much I'm worth for this job. That's how much you should pay me. And one way I think we become a bit more disagreeable is actually saying what we think, not saying what others may want to hear from you, actually telling what you think to be true. And that can be super scary. Why? Because we don't know the outcome that will occur if we tell our truth, what we think to be true. And we need to let go of the predetermined outcome that we want to attain in a given situation. We need to accept that the best possible outcome is that outcome that occurs when we are telling the truth or what we think to be true. And in terms of standing up for yourself, being a little more disagreeable, there's a beautiful quote by Dr. Jordan B. Peterson that drives the main point home here from my perspective. He said, everyone says, well, you should be harmless, virtuous, you shouldn't do any harm. You should sheath your competitive instinct. So forgo your competitive instinct. You shouldn't try to win. You don't want to be too aggressive. You don't want to be too assertive. No, wrong. You should be a monster, an absolute monster, and then you should learn how to control it. And then you should learn how to control it. It's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. He said, first, become a monster, and then learn how to control this. I think that's the essence of that quote, and not the other way around. First, figure out, I can stand up for myself. I can be a little bit more disagreeable, and I learn where my limit is. I work hard, figure out where it is. And once I become a monster, then I need to learn how to control that monster. And it's quite a noble goal, I believe, to figure out where your limits are. Because if you never do that, you don't know where your limits are, actually. If you always hold yourself a little bit back, your entire life, you don't know how far, how good you can become in a given discipline. And the question may arise, how we become a monster. And I think one way how we can become a monster is first standing up for yourself. And my caveat here, I mean monster in a positive way, not necessarily in a negative way. sometimes the connotation is a little bit negative, but for the sake of this episode, I see it as something that is noble and worth attending. One way to become a monster is figuring out how far you can go in your pursuits. And I'll give you an example. In, I think, 2023, I used to work in the US, in Salt Lake City, for a Swiss company. And at that time, I was running a coaching business where I helped adults with ADHD or high performers with ADHD to become more productive. And I was working crazy long hours. I woke up in 4:30 in the morning. I started to work at 5, worked 2 hours, went to the internship after that, to my work, basically, to the job. Worked there until 12 p.m., 1 hour. My lunch break was again working for my coaching business, then more work for the internship, and then in the evening again 1 or 2 hours work, normally 2 hours. Then I would hit the gym and I would sleep. That's more or less what I did. And I realized, okay, damn, I can go very, very far when it comes to work if I make sure I sleep my 8 hours, I eat properly, and I work out. And it's crazy how far you can go if you optimize for a single variable, in that case, work. And you have a simple life because that makes everything else easier if you're optimizing for a single thing. Because if you do 1,000 different things, hobbies, and you buy expensive stuff, is adding complexity, makes life a little bit more difficult. It's like Mike Tyson, for instance. He became successful with a simple lifestyle, but then he had a lot of money and bought all those fancy things back then, those houses, villas, etc. And then his quality as a boxer decreased a bit. And that pattern I saw many, many times. Now, circling back to my actual point, is to become a monster is to work hard, to see what you're capable of. And then you know actually how far you can go, because you don't want to stay at the limit, obviously. Otherwise, you will deteriorate. Your brain will get destroyed. You want to go a little bit down with your workload maybe. But at least now you know how far you can go. And I think at least, and I'm talking again to myself here, this is not no advice, I felt pretty good when I figured out where my limit is. And I realized I still haven't figured out where my actual limit is, because if you make sure you have a proper healthy lifestyle, you can go very, very far. Now, the question may then, when we talk about working a lot, a fair question that comes up is, yeah, at that point, you work a lot, but what about family, friends, or if you want to build up a family? I think that's a very important aspect. How can we bring work, your career, and family under one umbrella, that both things are going the right direction? That you're not only optimizing for work, but your family suffering, or vice versa. And I think the approach of, at that point, you have a family, you have children, you focus all your efforts on family and career and nothing else. And that sounds a little bit extreme, but I think there are always sacrifices to things you want to do in life. And it's a trade-off. You say yes to one thing, no to another thing, obviously. But I always was wondering, how can you be successful in both domains? Because why is this important to me? I don't want to be a father who has not a nice relationship with his children. I want to be the best possible father. I want to be here for my children. I want to give it all. I'm their role model. And at the same time, I do a very good job in my career, because I think the one supports the other and vice versa. Both are very important. If you're only optimizing for one thing, that's not the best possible state, and vice versa. And I think the solution, what I just outlined, is just realizing that, okay, two priorities, family and career. Everything else that's not part of that, you need to forgo. Again, that's just one thing maybe I will do. I will figure that out as I'm at one point when I choose to have children with my wife. Now, another question that may come up then is, what about balance? That's a fair point. I need to say, I see life a bit like Alex Hormozy. I see life in seasons. There are seasons in your life, some years, you have very intense periods. And there are other seasons in your life where you have calmer periods. Example, for the past 6-7 years, I had a very intense season. I was working a lot of hours. And then now I had a short season where I worked a little bit less. And now I have a new season. I start a new job. And again, it's a little bit more intense. Because sometimes I see people thinking, oh, you're working so hard and you're going to do that till the end, the rest of your life. Maybe I will, but Naval Ravikant talked about we human beings are lions. We sprint, so we hunt the animals, we eat the animal, then we reassess, and we sprint again. In other words, you translate that to our lives. We work on an intense project. We start a company. We work in a job. We sprint. We work long hours, hard. Then we get a reward. We take a break. We reassess. We set the proper goal. We focus on one thing, and we sprint again. And again, my caveat here, this is not working for everybody. But that's how I see it and how I function properly. Because from a personality perspective, I'm someone who likes to do the things I'm doing properly and very intensive. I don't do things, or at least I don't like to do things half-heartedly. Although sometimes still do, but mainly I like to do things properly. And if I'm working in a given week, I like to work a lot and see how far I can go. That's how I function well. And knowing that, then comes in that line analogy. And I think that's a nice representation of how life for me can look like. And I think the last puzzle, this jigsaw puzzle of becoming a monster, is also not saying stuff that makes you look weak. You don't tell stuff, you don't say things over yourself that look you or make you appear weak. And sometimes I still do that. You want that other human beings perceive you as humble, but sometimes it doesn't serve you very well. And I think to forgo that a bit or to leave that aside and talk nicely about yourself, be vulnerable, fair enough, yeah, but just to a certain extent. So let's quickly recap this monster thing. First, standing up for yourself, and second, figuring out where your limit is. I think those are the main points. And this quote by Peterson very much more or less stuck in my head, or basically the core idea of it, that you need to figure out how far you can go. I very much love that. Next thing I want to discuss today is 1,000 hard conversations. Now, what do I mean with that? When it comes to relationship between men and women, we always have two options. Obviously, we have many options, but if we are in a hard situation with our partner, with our wife, husband, whatever, you could either have 1,000 hard conversations and figure out a solution, or you can quit. You can end the relationship. And the easier path in most cases is just to quit, to let the other person go and end the relationship. The harder path is to figure out a solution, to figure out a game that both parties are willing to play. And why I love so much this core idea, and this is again an idea by Peterson. I think I should rename this podcast to All the Best Lessons from Peterson on this podcast. No, just kidding. He basically said that you can either quit or have 1,000 hard conversations. I'm paraphrasing here, but I love that because it gives you the option of thinking about, okay, I need to put in a little bit more effort. And another aspect in relation to that quote is this mindset: if you have someone in your life to be all in and you're in it for the long run, you're stuck with each other. There is no way out. You need to find a solution for every issue. And there are fair reasons why you can end in a relationship. Absolutely. Not denying that. But the mindset first is, yeah, we are all in and we need to figure out a solution. Because our brain is very much wired to, the easy path out is obviously way more enjoyable, and then we go on the next quest, we find someone else, and again this novelty, but it always becomes harder at a certain point, or in most cases. And just a quick reminder that, okay, 1,000 hard conversations or you quit. Better have the 1,000 hard conversations, because if you have the 1,000 hard conversations, you no longer need to fight, because you both find a game that both are willing to play in the best case. And you're still obviously talking to each other and you will have fights, but I think there are two very important rules when it comes to a thriving relationship. And again, that's from Peterson. The first is you need to talk at least for 90 minutes with your partner, with your significant other, about the economics of the household. So who pays the bills? Who pays the taxes? Who brings the trash out? Who cleans the dishes? Who cleans the toilet? Who makes the bed? Every single detail. You talk about practical stuff. How's your job going? What you're happy about? What's not going well? You actually want to know what's going on in the other person's life. If you don't do that, you will feel a sense of not belonging to, or you don't know, you start losing the knowledge of how the other person is. You actually don't know what's going on in the other person's life, and I think that's very important, obviously, in a relationship. And I think the second rule is to have a thriving relationship is to have one or better 2 date nights per week to maintain the romance in relationship. Why is this important? When life gets busy, saying that, oh, today we will not do our date night, it's pretty easy. But if we have a fixed commitment, the likelihood that you will stick to that is way higher. But on the other side, if you don't do that on a regular basis, the romance will decrease over time. You need to put in active effort and to do those date nights where maybe someone is cooking, then maybe one person is preparing a Spotify playlist, you put up some candles, or you go somewhere to eat and you dress nice, whatever it might be, but you put in some effort, both put in some effort. I think that's a crucial part of it. All this to say that either you could have 1,000 hard conversations or quit, and I think 1,000 hard conversations is in a lot of cases the better options, although it's hard. If you're in for the long run, that's a better approach. And again, just my humble opinion and talking to myself. Last thing I want to discuss today is communication with women. So, one of the mistakes I used to make in the past, and I'm sometimes still doing it, is jumping too quickly to a solution when talking to women. Give you an example. So, the woman is telling me about a problem in her life, or in general talking about an issue, and I jumped very fast directly to the solution. But women, that's my humble perspective, on average, and there are exceptions, there are outliers obviously, tend to sit with a problem longer. They circle around it, explore it from different angles, and only later, sometimes much later, move toward a solution. And I think men on average are a little bit more like, oh, this is the problem, we go directly to the solution. Whereas women bring in also an interesting aspect, talking a little bit deeper about the challenge or the problem, which also has its positive aspects. And I believe this realization of how to communicate with women, and they are iterating more about problems and talking first a little bit more deeper about the challenge, is especially important to understand in a relationship. So you want to first try to understand her. So you ask, what do you mean by that? Oh, why is that? How so? You also mirror what she said. You listen carefully, and only then, gently, and once you establish trust, you transition to a solution, but not too fast. If that shift is too fast, I think that's not only in the communication with women, everybody wants to be understood and heard, obviously, but I think that's, in terms of a thriving relationship, a very important aspect. And this simple shift has helped me communicate better and helped, I would say, when I talk to women, feel more understood. And I'm not saying I'm always doing a good job in doing that, but it's just interesting from a psychological perspective to first seek to understand before you want to be understood. That's the main thing here. And here, my caveat, this works obviously for men and women. You first want to ask questions, understand someone. That's a good sales lesson, by the way. You first identify what is the pain, what's the status quo, and later on you can transition to a solution or advice, but not too fast. Otherwise, if you give unsolicited advice, people are not that receptive to that. But I think it's especially true with women, on average again, and there are some outliers, but I think that served me very, very well actually, to not switch too fast to a solution. Yeah. All right. And okay, and again, I'm here. There are a lot of caveats and a lot of exceptions. I get that, totally get it. But on average, I think that's a fair observation I made over the past years. There's pretty much a lot of evidence that supports this from my perspective. All right, that's the end of this episode. Thanks for listening, guys. And as a thank you for tuning in, I've put together a list of 100 plus podcast episodes I loved most listening over the past years. And you simply can click the link below to download that list. You will find my best picks on health, wealth, relationships, and my all-time top 10 best podcast episodes. So if you enjoy listening to podcasts, get the list for free by clicking the link below. And now, have a good week. Cheers.